Change is coming by disaster or by design.
We hold the power to change the political calculus in America.
We have power. We have so much power.
So we will vote, we will resist, we will hug trees, we will stop our own polluting, we will boycott companies that pollute.
The seas are rising, and so are we.
We're gonna go raise a ruckus.
This really marks the escalation of Fire Drill Fridays.
And, you know, so much of my hope also comes from watching how ideas move from the shadows and edges and the margins towards the center.
Our social movements have grown exponentially.
Don't blink, don't back down from this fight, because when it comes to us and climate deniers, we will win politically and we will win on the policy.
Woo! Yes, we have the power to make changes, right? And we need to build a better world. So I'll see you next time. Thank you. Wow! Welcome to all you fire drill firefighters to our first Friday of the month, and it is a special one, right? To those of you joining for the first time, welcome to the Fire Drill Friday family, where we learn about the climate crisis, its causes, and what we can do about it. Each of you can help our movement grow by sharing today's rallies so your friends and colleagues can join the movement. So just take a moment now and hit the share button. The more people who understand the gravity of the climate crisis and are willing to act, the more chance we have to succeed in minimizing it. Today, I am excited because we're doing something a little different. You know, a lot of times learning about the climate crisis, the science and the politics of it, it can be kind of sobering. The stakes are high, right? And the climate disasters are serious business. But for us to succeed as a movement, we need to be able to fight back with our hearts, with joy, and find moments of levity in our collective struggle. And that's why today, in honor of April Fool's Day, we're going to take a look at some of the outlandish fools out there. I'm talking fossil fools. You know, I've learned a lot about fossil fuel corporations since I started doing this show. And I've come to realize a couple of things. First, the damage that they have caused goes far beyond what most people even imagine. Burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas is the #1 contributor to the climate crisis by a lot. But it's not just that, it's also damaging to people. It's the air pollution that kills 350,000 Americans in a single year. It's the pipelines built illegally through indigenous lands. It's the harm that frontline communities see, feel, and confront every single day. But another thing I've learned is that these corporations are ridiculous. I mean, their products are killing us and the planet. They're raking in billions of dollars, and they're posting on Twitter that they're part of the solution to the climate crisis. I mean, come on. For that alone, they deserve to be laughed at. Who do they think they're fooling? You know, these days, nobody would make the president of a tobacco company Secretary of State the way Trump did Rex Tillerson, who was the CEO of Exxon. I mean, nobody would invite a tobacco company president to a dinner party. And the tobacco company was rendered socially toxic. That's what we have to do with the fossil fuel industry and its executives. We have to make it socially unacceptable to invest in them, socialize with them, or take them seriously in any way. They've done us too much damage, fatal damage. So today, we're going to hear from some incredible speakers that are actively working to bring an end to the ridiculous and harmful reign of these fossil fools, particularly fossil fuel companies like Exxon, British Petroleum, Chevron, and Marathon that have been wreaking havoc with unfettered irresponsibility for years. We also have a special comedy segment where a member of the Fire Drill Friday audience will play a fossil fuel themed game with some amazing comedians. So make sure you stick around, okay? Our first speaker is going to be telling us about some of Exxon's shenanigans. Emily Atkins is an award-winning climate journalist who writes Heated, a daily newsletter for people who are pissed off about the climate crisis. Heated's main focus is holding powerful people and institutions accountable for their role in causing climate change and giving regular folks the information they need to take effective action. Emily's been covering climate politics in Washington, D.C. for over 7 years, previously holding staff positions at the New Republic, Think Progress, and Sinclair Broadcast Group. Emily was mentored by the late, great investigative journalist Wayne Barrett, and she works every day to make him proud. Welcome, Emily Atkin.
Hello, Jane. Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you, talk to you again. I am so happy to be here today to talk about the 11th biggest climate polluting company in the United States, ExxonMobil. And I'm really happy to be doing it because, you know, for a living, I cover what I would call climate BS. I like to talk about people, institutions who just lie about it, who spout a lot of BS. And I think that out of all of the companies that spout BS about climate change, Exxon is like the original #1 climate BSer. So it's really an honor to be kicking off with the OG of BS. I'm a journalist, and so I firmly believe that knowledge is power, and that narratives are power, and that the narrative that you can shape, the information that you let out and give people, that determines what we do as a society. I believe that as a journalist, and Exxon believes that too. So Exxon has tried really hard to shape the narrative about climate change ever since they first learned about it as early as 1977, because nothing threatens Exxon's profits more than us taking action on climate change. And I think that's such an important thing for people to remember. Now, I think among like climate people, you guys, there's stuff that you already know about Exxon. I think that most climate people already know that Exxon knew about climate change in the 70s, right? Everyone knows Exxon knew. And if you don't, like the basic gist is that Exxon scientists knew about climate change as early as 1977. That's about 11 years before it became a public issue. And that did not prevent them from spending decades afterwards refusing to publicly acknowledge that climate change was real and that it was harmful. And they even actively promoted climate misinformation, knowing that. And many have likened this to the lies spread by the tobacco industry regarding the health impacts of smoking. And that's why Exxon's getting sued up the wazoo all over the place for misleading consumers, misleading investors about the real financial risks, economic risks, health risks, not to mention of their products. So most people know that. But I want to tell you a little bit about what you might not know about Exxon. And I think it might really help you understand sort of why we're in the climate situation we're in today. And before I start, I just want to give a shout out to the journalist Amy Westervelt, whose investigative climate podcast Drilled is where I first learned a lot of the facts I'm about to share with you. It's a true crime style podcast about climate deniers and Exxon and oil industry players. It's really cool. So Exxon, as we know it, was established in 1972. And before that, Exxon was still a thing before 1972, but it was called the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. Standard Oil was owned by John D. Rockefeller, and so Exxon is the largest direct descendant of John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil. Why am I telling you this? Sounds super boring. I I want to know what you guys think about John D. Rockefeller today. Like, what do you think about when you think about the Rockefeller Foundation? You know, you think like, good, that's good. I like the Rockefellers. That is nice people. That is philanthropy. That's awesome. And that's no mistake. John D. Rockefeller wants you to think that. What John D. Rockefeller did not want you to know about was that in 1914, he got really mad that he had a coal company. And he got really mad that his coal miners went on strike for poor working conditions. So he hired a private detective to drive around the coal, like a team of private detectives to drive around the coal fields at night with machine guns strapped to the car. And they started shooting striking miners and their families in their sleep in their tents. And the cars were called death specials. Now that's the worst thing you've ever heard, right? I mean, that's absolutely terrible. And the reason you probably don't know that is because John D. Rockefeller hired an amazing PR specialist named Ivy Ledbetter Lee to rehabilitate his public image after that. And Ivy Ledbetter Lee, I'm getting to the Exxon part here, Ivy Ledbetter Lee created the PR playbook for the entire oil industry, which the industry still uses this playbook 100 years later. Ivy Ledbetter Lee was the original publicist for the company that became ExxonMobil. Lee was also a publicist for the Nazis before he was a publicist for Standard Oil. So that's just something to consider. But when we're talking about Exxon, what we're talking about is the oil company with not only like the most history of storytelling and shaping narratives to influence people and influence the story we tell as a society about climate change, they're going back to the entire beginning of PR, like what PR is today. And that starts with, you know, rehabilitating images of people who are doing awful stuff. And the tactics that they use, as Amy says in her podcast, are fake news, crisis actors, using corporate philanthropy as a PR move. And the intention is to shift the public's focus away from a company's bad behavior and look at the good things that they've done. Do not look at this bad stuff. Look at the good. Exxon is the master of this, and they have been the master of this since before probably many of you were born. I'm guessing a lot of the audiences are going to be younger people, but some of you probably wonder, why do my parents, why are they so avoidant of saying anything bad about the oil industry or whatever? It's because Exxon's PR campaigns have been going on for years. Something that I really wanted to show you, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see it, are some of these like Disney World Exxon sponsored ads. I don't even know if you can see these, but anyway, Exxon was literally like a sponsor of the Epcot Center using Mickey Mouse and Goofy for like the University of Energy in the late 80s and early 90s, just to tell people like how much Exxon was so amazing. And they're touting, they literally had an exhibit touting fossil fuels to kids at Disney World that opened the same year that their manager of environmental affairs sent a memo to the company telling them about the greenhouse effect and how bad fossil fuels were going to be for the planet. And so this kind of stuff has been infiltrated in the brains of everybody for years, because it's not just at Disney World, taking out ads in Exxon was one of the first oil companies to really start advertising in big newspapers and really trying to convince people of their worth and value and downplaying climate science. Exxon is still trying to propagandize this today. Jane mentioned a little bit about this in the beginning of them advertising on Twitter. I took a few tweets just before I came on here. Some of the sponsored things that they're running are like, how could industrial plants lower CO2 emissions? We're finding ways to help capture them. # unexpected energy. And then a picture of a green thing and trees, and it says CO2, and again, Exxon is the 11th biggest climate polluting company in the US. It's just like a reminder. Like another one is like the industry is looking for ways to lower CO2 emissions, and we're working on ways to capture them, you know? And the point of all of this is to shape the narrative and the story that we tell about them so that they continue to have the social license to operate. You know, I've been reporting on climate change now for 7.5 years, and what I have learned is that carbon emissions are not the hardest problem we have to deal with in the climate fight. The hardest problem are the stories we tell. Public relations is the most important weapon the fossil fuel industry has in the fight for a livable climate. And as long as big oil companies like Exxon have society's permission to expand production, they're never going to wind down their operations to the degree scientists say is necessary to preserve a livable climate. Now, in order to get society's permission, they just need to convince you that they're on your side, that they're helping, that the scandals, they don't exist. They didn't know about climate change. They didn't know it was going to be so bad. They didn't fund disinformation. They don't still do it today. These activists are overreacting. Oil is necessary for your life and your survival, and it's going to be that way for a long time. Exxon has been doing this for longer than any other oil company, modern oil company today, and they have the most experience. But here's the difference. The difference from today versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, is that now you can talk back to Exxon. PR used to be one way. It used to be Exxon sponsors the thing at Disney World, and you just go to Disney World. There's an Exxon ad on TV, and you just watch it. Now, social media is the fight. That's where it's all taking place. And I'm sure our next speaker, Mary, is going to tell you a lot more about that next. But now when they talk to you, you can talk back. And that means that you have the power to deprive companies like Exxon of their social license. Because the reality is that while Exxon might say that they are helping, Exxon's just released their first climate change plan in the entire 43 years since they first learned about the existence of climate change. And it does not even commit to reducing carbon emissions. It commits to reducing carbon intensity, which is fancy industry speak for we don't actually intend to reduce carbon emissions. Exxon's actual plan for the future, if you go and read their industry documents, is to continue extracting oil and to increase oil production. That is Exxon's plan. You have the power to deprive them of their social license to do that. It might not seem like a lot to reply to something they say on Twitter and say, that's BS, but it's more powerful than you think. And I know Mary's going to talk to you more about that, and I'm so happy to just be able to share a little bit of this history with you. Knowledge is power. Make sure you read as much as you can about all of these companies and the narratives that they're trying to tell you. Thank you so much for having me, Jane. Back to you.
Thanks, Emily. Thank you. Thank you, Emily, for giving us so many great tools to pierce the narrative of Exxon. Boy, that's really valuable. Thank you. And our next speaker is Mary Heglar. We're going to hear about BP's nonsense and how green trolling is really getting under their skin. Mary Annaïse Heglar is a climate justice writer and essayist. Her work has been published in Rolling Stone, Vox, The New Republic, Boston Globe, and Wired. She's the co-host and co-creator of the Hot Take newsletter and podcast, which takes a holistic, humorous, and humane look at the way the climate crisis is covered in the media. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jane, for having me. April Fool's is one of my favorite holidays, and I'm really honored to be here with you talking about BP, who I hate. So first, I want to talk a little bit about what is green trolling, because it's probably the thing I'm best known for these days. And Emily's kind of gotten into some of it, but the really simple thing is that you find fossil fuel companies online and you cyberbully them. gleefully and relentlessly. It's really fun and it's really easy to do because they deserve it. And their hypocrisy is very easy to point out because they're hypocrites. But not only is it easy and low stakes and all of that, but it's important because a big part of the way that these companies have been able to wreak so much havoc is because they have that social license to operate, which Emily was talking about. And by attacking their reputations and their public image and doing it in public, we can chip away at their social license to operate. That is actually more valuable to them than money. And social media is an ideal place to do that because the playing field is evened out. It's not the same as like seeing their ad at Disney World, like Emily mentioned, or seeing their commercials on MSNBC or somewhere where all you can do is yell at the TV and it doesn't really make a difference. On Twitter, it's a two-way dialogue and it's public to other people to see who might fall victim to their propaganda. And that really is your audience when you are green trolling. Your audience isn't the oil company itself that you think is going to go change their behavior. Your audience is other people so that you can make it known that these are not good people. And also there's more of us than there are of them. And social media really makes that our power. The companies that I focus on right now are BP and Chevron, Shell, and the American Petroleum Institute. I don't focus on Exxon because I can't. They blocked me over the summer. So as much as they are, you know, kind of like the OGs of climate denial, as Emily was laying out, they're also really big babies. Exxon will block people like really fast. It's really kind of amazing. But for today, I'm going to focus on BP and all the many, many ways that I hate them because they're kind of like my green trolling white whale. So I'll just tell a little bit about my origin story as a troll. So I've been on Twitter for a little while now, like maybe 3 years, and I rail against fossil fuels on there. That's kind of why I joined Twitter, was to talk about climate change and fossil fuel companies and how awful they are. And that made the Twitter algorithm think that I liked fossil fuels. So they started showing me their ads. And because I am a very petty person, I started reporting their ads to Twitter as inciting violence or misinformation or some other way, just to be petty, just to annoy them. And then one day in 2019, BP had an ad that was encouraging people to calculate their personal carbon footprint. And I kept trying to report it, and I couldn't get the report to go through. And so finally, in no uncertain terms, out of frustration and with slightly more colorful language than I will repeat here, I asked BP what their carbon footprint was. And it garnered a lot of other people piling on and asking some of the same questions. And also it just felt really, really good. And at that point, I decided now I have an outlet for my climate rage, and I will not just wait for these ads to show up in my feed. I will go looking for these companies. And I've just been green trolling ever since and never looked back. Now, more about BP. BP, I would say, is the OG of greenwashing in particular. They will have you thinking that they're a wind energy company or solar energy company if you just don't look even halfway too close. They invented the term of the carbon footprint because they wanted to convince consumers that this was their fault and not BP's own fault, which they know is not true. BP has known about climate change since at least 1990 and acknowledged it public in 1997. They may have known in 1970 with Exxon. I'm sure they're friends. Maybe they have lunch together. I don't know. But that is 3 whole decades. 3 decades of knowing about this. And they will look you straight in your face today and talk about going net zero by 2050. They are not getting another 30 years of my life with me saying nothing about it. And they have played and continue to play a very active role in the climate denial machine. To this very day, their board is trying to convince their shareholders to vote against climate safe policies. And their greenwashing isn't even that good. All of their wind farms and hydro plants, none of that is even in line with the Paris Agreement, which even itself isn't enough to get us to a livable future. So it's not enough. And let's not forget that they've proven their immorality beyond climate change, beyond natural gas. If you Google BP and human rights violations, you will be appalled at what you see. They are tied to kidnappings and tortures in Latin America, and also a little something called the Iraq War. So these are immoral companies with or without climate change. So their whole like, oh, we didn't know it was going to cause climate change. You knew it was going to cause death. And that's enough for me. So also, even in the United States, they are literally a criminal. They pled guilty to 14 criminal charges in the aftermath of the Deepwater Horizon spill in 2010. And speaking of the Deepwater Horizon spill, this year is the 11th anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon spill, when I don't know how many animals in the ocean died, how many birds died, when waves began to look like the ocean did not look recognizable at that point. It looked like they had created a whole different planet, not to mention the loss of human life in the immediate aftermath, and also on into this day. The Gulf Coast is still suffering. This year is the 11th anniversary. Last year, we missed the 10th anniversary because we're all reeling from the pandemic. But this year, I encourage all of us to wish BP a very, very unhappy anniversary on April 20th, because we need to let them know that we haven't forgotten and we never will. Back to you, Jane. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Yeah. Mary, you've given me such good tools. I cannot wait to start green trolling. Now, as promised, it's time for our special Match the Fossil Fools game. Are you ready? We selected a member of the Fire Drill Friday audience as our contestant, Crystal. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Jane. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for joining us to play this game where you're going to be asked to match each story you hear with the fossil fool that it's about. And if you can do it right, if you can match the right fossil fool with the story 2 out of 3 times, you win. Are you ready?
Yes, ready as can be. Let's do it.
Okay. Your first story of corporate foolishness comes from a friend of mine, SAG, the Screen Actors Guild award-winning actor, writer, and director, Paul Scheer. He'll be seen opposite Don Cheadle in season 2 of Showtime's Black Monday. You can also see him on HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm and countless other hit programs. So let's listen.
Hey, I wanted to share a little story about their former CEO. He was giving a presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations, and he felt the urge to describe the climate crisis as nothing more than an engineering problem. That's right. The climate crisis is an engineering problem. He said, as a matter of fact, changes to weather patterns that move crop production around will adapt to that. It's an engineering problem, and it has engineering solutions. That is actually a pretty interesting thought. Crop production areas. What's another word for that? Oh, yeah, I know. Farms. As Bill McKibben said, it's kind of hard to move Iowa. Then also went on to share his thoughts about the fear that people have about the climate crisis. You know, like when their homes are destroyed, their families are killed, and their towns are flooded. He said, the fear factor people want to throw out there to say, hey, we got to stop this, I just do not accept.
God. Thank you, Paul. It's hard to believe. What a wild story. Crystal, who do you think said that? Crystal, what do you think?
I think Crystal's computer died, actually. I think she became the Shell must have unplugged her computer. So let's go with Shell until she's able to get back.
Okay. You think Shell, huh? All right, so shall we just, isn't that interesting? What happened to Crystal? Okay.
I'm back. Sorry about that.
Crystal, what do you think? Were you able to watch Paul Scheer?
Yes, I was.
What do you think?
So based on what Emily said earlier about climate BS, I'm assuming that it's Exxon.
You are right. You are right. Oh, well, everybody's been making jokes this week about the ship, the Ever Given, the one that got stuck in the Suez Canal. In 1989, nobody was laughing when the Exxon Valdez spilled 11 million gallons of oil in the Prince William Sound. Were you even born then? No.
Not yet.
Well, let me tell you, it was really horrendous. And at that point, it was the worst spill in US history. Today, over 30 years later, you can dig a shallow hole in certain beaches along Alaska's Prince William Sound, and you will still find oil from that spill. So welcome back. I'm glad you're back, Crystal. We got a little worried there. Your next story comes from Akilah Hughes, a writer, comedian, and YouTuber, and currently the co-host of Crooked Media's What a Day daily news podcast. She's a Sundance Labs and USC MacArthur Foundation Civic Media Fellow, and Razorbill published a collection of her personal essays titled, Obviously, Stories from My Timeline. Her comedic YouTube channel, It's Akilah, obviously, has amassed more than 150,000 subscribers. Let's take a look.
The pitiful millionaire CEO of foreign oil giant is upset at the inconvenience caused to him by his company's devastation of the Gulf of Mexico. And by the way, offshore drilling explosion claimed 11 lives on April 20th, 2010, and has since spewed 20 to 100 million gallons of oil into the Gulf. At least 491 birds, 227 turtles, and 27 other mammals, including dolphins, have been found dead. But hey, who's counting, Tony? Immediately after apologizing, Hayward then complained about the effect of the Deepwater Horizon disaster on his personal life, saying, quote, "I would like my life back. Aw, poor baby. Your life's hard? Is it? Is it?"
Oh, God. Okay, Crystal, what do you think?
Well, first I want to say her dog is adorable. And second, she mentioned the Deepwater Horizon. So this has got to be BP.
You're right. Yes. You're right. It took 87 days for BP to plug up the well of the Deepwater Horizon after the explosion in 2010. And then BP lied about the 210 million gallons of crude oil that leaked into the Gulf, claiming it was much less. That lie alone cost them $175 million. I mean, it's one thing to cause one of the worst environmental disasters in recent history, but it truly takes balls. I mean, a villainous fool, right, with big balls to try to cover it up. It's disgusting. Anyway, good for you, Crystal. You've got one story left. Your final story comes from Helen Hong. Helen is a fan favorite on the weekly NPR quiz show, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and can be seen on Silicon Valley and The Unicorn. She brings awareness to Asian American justice issues on her family's YouTube channel, which is called Old Korean Dad Stories, parenthesis, and sometimes Mom. That's here, let's watch.
Hi, it's Helen Hong, and I've got a story for you. Listen to this. The oil giant is rebranding itself as an ex who doesn't know why it didn't work out between us, and can't we please try again? In a new ad campaign titled Only Human, claims that it's only human to stumble, vaguely kinda sorta asking for understanding for its atrocious environmental record. But baby, exclaims top executives trying to get back into the public's good graces. We've changed. We've spent a ton of money on developing low-carbon energy sources, like a whole 0.2% of our budget. In actual fact, spends more on advertising campaigns to win over consumers with misleading claims than it does on actual climate solutions. That's like hiring an airplane banner that reads, "I've stopped cheating on you," rather than actually stopping cheating on you. But honey pie, continues in its new wooing campaign, We're only the second most polluting company in the world, which means we only lie and cheat and abuse you like, what, 80% of the time? When confronted about its very recent oil spill, downplays the situation. Oh, peach pie. Why you gotta bring up old stuff? That 600 gallons that we spilled in the San Francisco Bay, that was like a whole month and a half ago. The Only Human campaign also goes on to say it's only human to push where no one thought possible, which we think alludes to plans to drill in the Arctic. It's either that or a proposed threesome with and its best friend. We're not down with either.
God, she is funny. Okay, Crystal, this is your chance. What do you think?
Okay. Well, first, yeah, that definitely reminded me about one of my exes. So that's not good. I think I'm going to go with Chevron, though.
Yes, you're right. Yeah. Hey, you're right. You're right. You know, just over a month ago, back in February, a Chevron refinery in Richmond, California leaked 600 gallons of oil into the San Francisco Bay. 600 gallons of oil is no joke. Congratulations, Crystal. You've won our Fossil Fools matching game. Yes.
Thank you. Right,
Thanks so much for playing and being a part of the Fire Drill Friday community. And big shout outs to your show, Planeta Hey.
Thank you.
Crystal. Oh boy. Okay, now for the second part of today's rally, we're going to hear from the front lines of these fights. Andres Soto is the Richmond organizer with Communities for a Better Environment, a statewide environmental justice organization. Andres has been a zealous advocate for language minority communities, youth violence prevention and gun control, police accountability, and political enfranchisement. Andres is co-founder of the Richmond Progressive Alliance. In 2012, Andres became the Richmond organizer for CBE. 6 days later, Chevron blew up. Andres has been a consistent presence at many public agency meetings, articulating the position of and on behalf of environmental justice communities, speaking truth to power. Thank you for joining us, Andres. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Jane, for that wonderful introduction. And breaking news, Chevron has just announced they are decommissioning their Richmond refinery. April Fools.
You're bad.
So I wish it were true, but you know, that last piece was really quite interesting because in Richmond, for the last year, we have created a narrative campaign called Ending the Toxic Relationship with Chevron, because Chevron has been present in Richmond since 1901. And it was the first refinery they built in California. In fact, just like Exxon, Chevron used to be one of Rockefeller's 7 sisters. It was Standard Oil of California. And they have not only polluted our water and our air, but they have polluted our politics, which is why we created the Richmond Progressive Alliance to stand up to the corruption that existed in our community and still exists in our community, and to change the way our government regulates that industry. In Richmond, of course, behind me is a shot of the 2012 fire on August 6th. That was an anniversary of when the US dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and sent a huge mushroom cloud over Hiroshima. Well, in Richmond on August 6th, Chevron sent a similar mushroom cloud over Richmond, sending over 15,000 people to the hospital. Chevron's lobbyist, Eric Zell, was president of the board of that hospital. They are now closed, and we do not have a hospital for people to report to once the Chevron blows up again. but we have been taking on Chevron in multiple arenas with the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, as well as through the City of Richmond's Land Use Authority. And one of the things we realized was that both market forces, as capitalists call them, as well as consumer demand and the automobile manufacturing industry are all working together along with legislation to actually reduce demand for their products. And so we began a campaign. We issued a report last March called Decommissioning California Refineries to make the case.
Find the perfect song for your video in 5 seconds. Go to Artlist.
In order to meet our goals, climate change goals in California, that we need to begin to decommission California refineries sooner rather than later. Otherwise, we're going to have to shut them down automatically. We can wean off through a gradual, progressive closure. Well, what happened during the quarantine when COVID hit? Immediately, Marathon Refinery in Martinez announced its closure, and they are closed. Phillips 66 in Rodeo announced that they want to close the front end of the refinery in San Luis Obispo and convert the Rodeo refinery into the world's largest so-called renewable diesel facility. Of course, we believe that that is a false solution because it would require massive deforestation of the Amazon and depletion of the aquifer in the Midwest in order to produce the vegetable oils that they want to turn into combustible engine fuels. So that is not a solution. The real solution is converting all of our fleets over to electricity, converting our housing energy systems into electricity, and widely expand. We ought to be investing rather than in so-called renewable diesel. We need to invest our money into the new infrastructure of renewable fuels or renewable energy. We have a lot of sunshine and we have a lot of wind, and that's what we need to happen in our community. We are working on this. We have just had a town hall meeting where we had 175 people show up to discuss decommissioning the Chevron refinery. That is our project. We want to lead the way. We have a majority. It took us many years to get a majority of our city council to be Richmond Progressive Alliance members. We are working with Council Member Eduardo Martinez to directly create policies that are going to enable us to protect our city because we're dependent upon their taxes, but also to protect the workers and to protect our community members as we go through this transition. We need a massive investment in localized energy creation and distribution so that we're not dependent upon mega corporations like PG&E and other folks that are trying to essentially just continuously rip us off. And this ending the toxic relationship with Chevron shows that, they have lied to us. They have polluted us. They are currently fighting us at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District around the story of putting on a piece of equipment on their catalytic cracker unit, the single most polluting piece of equipment. We want them to put on a wet gas scrubber that would reduce the toxic particulate matter that they are putting into our lungs, into our bodies for multiple generations by 95%. And yet they're resisting it. They're using the canard. Hey, toxic particulate matter is not bad for you. And so those are the kind of lies that are causing us to say we need to end this relationship and we need to end it on our terms, not on their terms. And so that is our struggle. And that is also our success. We've been making tremendous progress. We have the people on our side. Chevron infamously in 2014 spent $3.5 million in our local mayoral and city council race, and all of their candidates lost. So in this last election cycle, they had many of their surrogates, including the building trades unions and other local polluters and the realtors and apartment owners, all piling on, spending tons of money but they did not put in any money themselves because they know their name is now toxic in Richmond. And that's how we're going to win this battle. So thank you, Jane, and turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Andres. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It is so essential. And folks, everything Andres said is true, but you wouldn't know it looking at Chevron's ads. You know, the company spends millions of dollars every year to mislead the public and distract it from the pollution that the company actually creates. But there is a chance that they might finally be held accountable. A couple of weeks ago, Greenpeace, Earthworks, and Global Witness filed a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission about Chevron's deceitful greenwashing. The second most polluting company in the world should not be running multi-million-dollar ad campaigns telling consumers that they're good for the environment. We urge the FTC to do the right thing and investigate Chevron. So now, finally, we're going to hear from Theresa Landrum. She is a community organizer and activist, has been fighting against environmental injustices for over 20 years. Ms. Landrum currently serves on 2 boards under Governor Gretchen Whitmer. The Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, helping to set PFAS standards for water in Michigan, and the Michigan Advisory Council for Environmental Justice, MACEJ, helping to develop policy standards for air pollution in the state. Presently, Ms. Landrum is the community education specialist for the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition's Clean Air Council. A lifelong Detroiter, Ms. Landrum is one of Southwest Detroit zip code 48217's most outstanding voices. Welcome, Theresa.
Thank you for that intro, Jane. And thank you for this opportunity to speak as a community resident that is on the front lines of this climate change. I come from an area that has been deemed the most polluted zip code in the state of Michigan. And we emphasize zip code. That is our federal name from the federal government. My community is less than 2 square miles. Our demographics are elderly, low income, predominantly African American, and people of color. And what's so different about our community is we have the only oil refinery in the state of Michigan located right in my zip code, Marathon Oil. Marathon is one of the major polluters that contribute to the carbon imprint that is fueling climate change. Marathon, I can walk to Marathon from my house. There's no buffer, there's no protection for residents. In my community, we have a high rate of asthma, cancer, diabetes, lupus, heart disease, anything that can be connected to air pollution, we have in less than a 2-mile radius, less than a populace of 9,000 people. Our cancer rate is higher than any other zip code in the nation. Our pollution rate, as mentioned, is higher than any other zip code in the state of Michigan. And from what I'm understanding, number 3 in the nation. I tell you that because you do not often hear the stories of people that are impacted by pollution. More than 7 million people die a year of air pollution. And guess what? Many of those people come from my community. When COVID-19 hit, it hit Michigan and specifically Detroit hard because we learned from the Harvard study that the droplets of COVID rolled in on the PM matter. That's the particulate matter that is created by pollution. My community is surrounded by more than 26 heavily polluting industries. Why is that important? It's important because these polluters are the ones that are contributing to the sulfur dioxide, to the ozone, to the destruction of our ecological system. And here, my community mirrors hundreds of communities across the nation. So they know that their operation is contributing to the death of America's population. I want to tell you a story, and the story is a personal story. I live on a street called Liddesdale, and in 1 block radius, not a street, a block, more than 12 of my neighbors have died of cancer. I am a cancer survivor. My mother and my father both died of cancer. We have a prominent figure in our community, Dr. Dolores Leonard. On her block, 1 city block, 17 of her neighbors have died of cancer. What does that tell you? There has to be something, there has to be a source and a factor. And we just happen to have Marathon Oil in our backyard. Just recently, Marathon was fined nearly $300,000 for their air emissions. And what is troubling about this is the fine came after the EGLE, which is our regulatory agency, Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, took 10 years of air emissions and rolled them into 1 violation. And they were only fined $300,000. And that $300,000, $250,000 about, went to our local school, Mark Twain School, to put on an air filtration system, an air purification system, and an air conditioning in the system on the school, so our children wouldn't receive the huge impact from the pollution that's coming from outside. Mind you, we're located in Detroit, which is 144 square miles, but in a 2-mile radius, a community and a zip code of 4217 is more severely impacted than the rest of greater Detroit. That tells you that something is wrong. It tells you that these bad actors like Exxon and Marathon are contributing to the carbon emissions that are destroying our atmosphere. And we're doing something about it. We're not just talking about it, we're doing something about it. As mentioned, I'm on 2 boards that serve the governor, and that's monumental because community is often left out of the conversation. Decisions that are being made for us are not being made by us. I thank God for the opportunity to be one of the residents that has been vocal about it for over 20 years, that our air is killing us. I grew up with air that was brown. I grew up with air that was gray. I grew up with air that was black. And I thought that was normal, but that's not normal. And what's more unique about my community is that my community has been deemed in non-attainment for sulfur dioxide and ozone, 2 of the gases that are destroying and are destroying our atmosphere and pivotal in what is creating climate change. Not only that, the area that I live in of Lower Wayne County has been deemed the epicenter of pediatric asthma. Our children are being born with asthma. Our children are being impacted in the womb by pollution. And that is not what we are about. So by me having this opportunity, along with other residents like Dr. Dolores Leonard, Justin Anwenu, Rhonda Anderson, Vicki Thomas, Ebony Elmore, Alicia, we're a small group of community people that are fighting the very regulatory agencies that are put in place to protect us. So we're working with state officials and local officials to reset the standards of air pollution in Michigan. We're actually working on the MAC-EJ that was mentioned earlier to set up a environmental screening tool in Michigan to address cumulative impact. And that is all the pollution coming from all the industries that are impacting human life and animal life and plant life. And what's so unique about it is I work on a committee with Congressman Raul Guajova and Congressman Donald McCutcheon and Senator Tammy Duckworth, where we're introducing the Environmental Justice for All Act that will have a very profound impact across the nation if we can get federal policy to address the issue of air pollution, therefore the global issue of climate change that is impacting this earth. We're not talking about it, we're being about it. And that's what I suggest to everybody. look at the face. I'm a face on the front line of climate change. And I'm trying to make a difference so that we can have a livable life, a breathable life, and a quality of life for our children and our future generations. Thank you for this opportunity, and back to you, Jane.
Thank you, Theresa, so much.
Power to the people, get up!
Thank
Oh God, Theresa, I wish I could put my arms around you and hug you so tight. I mean, you are the kind of woman that the world needs millions of. I hope we all can have your courage. Thank you for sharing your insight and your experience and for the work you're doing on the front lines. I promise you that Fire Drill Fridays, when we can, we will come there and help raise your issue. Thank you. And thanks to all of today's guests who are working to expose and replace the most offensive and pathetic behaviors of the dying fossil fuel industry. We've just heard about 4 of the most foolish fossil fuel companies. Do you know what's even more ridiculous than them? The federal government has been giving billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry every year, and it's time for that to change. And we can all help make that happen. I want to thank everybody who sent a message to President Biden over the last month, asking him to eliminate subsidies for these fossil fuel companies. His administration has heard you and has responded to the pressure. Just this Wednesday, Biden announced that he'll include eliminating subsidies for fossil fuels in his recovery plan. Now we need him to follow through and release a comprehensive list of subsidies and action plan on how he's going to overcome oil industry opposition in Congress and turn his plan into law. We'd like to ask you to send a thank you message to President Biden on Twitter for taking this huge step and remind him that this is only the first step, right? We need a concentrated political pressure campaign from the White House on congressional leadership to eliminate subsidies once and for all. And to see how to do this, go to firedrillfridays.com/take action. And finally, we want you to know that we have to take urgent action if we have any hope in preventing the most catastrophic effects of climate change. So for Earth Day this month, as we host a very special youth episode that will be focused on the future we're fighting for. And here's what we want to do. We want to hear from the young people who are, through you all, a part of the Fire Drill Friday community. We want you to share what any little ones in your life, children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, what they think about climate change. You can film their answers to the question, what is climate change? That's the first question. What is climate change? The second question is, if you were in charge, how would you fix it? Upload the video to any social media platform with the hashtag #ClimateKids. Got it? Hashtag #ClimateKids. And we'll be able to get the video and we're going to show it. Okay? That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining today's Fossil Fuel Rally. Can't wait to see you next week for what is sure to be a great conversation with Washington's Governor Jay Inslee. Governor Inslee, a real climate champion. See you next time.
Thank you, Jane.